Good evening. Welcome to NDWG Democratic TV. Tonight, the past actions shape our future.
Mwariwe inzwa kuchema nikayedu yavapanguva takamira pamugano wera mangwana.
Good afternoon, wherever you are joining us in the UK, in Zimbabwe, and across the region. And I want to welcome you to NWG Global TV in collaboration with Champions Network TV. And I am your host today, Mija. And I know yesterday, if you listened to us, we brought you powerful discussion on the just ended consultations around constitutional amendment number 3 in Zimbabwe. What emerged clearly yesterday from our discussion with Dr. Zembe was that the process was not fully inclusive. Dr. Zembe described it as quite violent and rushed and controlled, and possibly it was a predetermined undertaking. We also heard that the National Democratic Working Group, together with other progressive forces, announced their position to disengage from the process because around unfairness and other things. And today we take this conversation further. The question is this a new concept, or is it a part of a deeper historical pattern in Zimbabwe's constitutional development? From 1987, amendment that it created the executive president without a referendum, to 2000 referendum where the people said no, to the 2013 constitution, often described as the people's constitution. The question we ask is, have Zimbabwe's constitutional changes truly reflected the will of the people? And joining us today to discuss this is still none other than Dr. Zembe. Dr. Zembe, welcome to the program.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Michel. I was waiting for you to unmute the mic from that side. Greetings to fellow compatriots once more as we continue to interrogate issues relating to our constitutional governance processes. Thank you very much. Can I continue?
Let me just say one more before you come in. For those watching us, for those who are watching us, you can just share this broadcast with your friends, and if you can also like and share, and also make your comments in our chat box. And we'll also want to hear your views as Dr. Zembe continues in this discussion. So let me start by asking Dr. Zembe. Dr. Zembe, yesterday we had a discussion about this constitutional amendment. I just want to hear from you any thoughts that you had when you went away from yesterday? Any comments that you got from members of the public before we go deeper into today's conversation?
Yes, I've had a few feedbacks from my comments, whom I shared the discussion with. And the one that was quite clear actually commended the program for being candid, for being open, and for being factual in terms of unearthing the information relating to our constitutional developments. And it was indicated that it is such discussions that are required in our country more if we are to resolve our problems, constitutional problems, governance problems, economic, social problems. And from the respondents, to be quite specific, 3 of them, they agreed without knowing each other that we should have more of the robust discussions so that Zimbabwe can arrive at permanent solutions to problems of governance that have affected this country from the pre-independence era. So that's the feedback I got so far. But of course, more and more are still digesting the combination of both time and resources to listen to our recordings and to our debates. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mine was just a one from a young man. I think he watched us. Then he said, "Oh, who is Dr. Zembe?" And then I said, "Oh, Dr. Zembe is well-known politician in Zimbabwe. Give you a resume." Then he said, "Oh, I was listening to your conversation. It was quite informative." So we are even speaking to the young mind, which is something that I appreciate. Now let's begin with Dr. Zembe in today's conversation. In 1987, Zimbabwe introduced what they termed the executive president, a major constitutional shift that concentrated power in one office. This was not taken to the voters. Can you just take us through why at that point a referendum was not necessary?
Thank you. Yes, I'll give a background to the developments that led to the constitutional amendment number 7 of 1987. The background story is that, as we know, those of my age and your age, the problems we had, the governance problems in Rhodesia led to a war, and that war led to a conference that was organized by the conservative government of Margaret Thatcher then in Britain, the Lancaster House talks. Those of the younger generation, obviously, with a political interest, may have studied the history. So the Lancaster House talks of 1979 were organized by the British government. And that Lancaster House conference was agently organized in order to stop the war of liberation, which had been intensified here in Zimbabwe. And at that Lancaster House conference, political leaders from Zimbabwe were invited. Those who led ZANU and ZANLA armed forces at the time was Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and those who led ZAPU and ZIPRA armed forces at the time was Joshua Nkomo, were invited together with the political leaders that had formed the internal settlement in 1979, consisting of Abel Muzorewa, Ian Douglas Smith, Chief Jeremiah Chirau, and the Chief Kaisa Ndiweni. Those leaders had entered into an internal settlement in 1978 and produced a Zimbabwe Rhodesia government where Muzorewa became prime minister for 6 months. And this was this had taken place before the Lancaster House talks were organized. So these were the parties who were invited to the Lancaster House talks. And from that conference, an agreement was hammered out. And at that conference, one major term of the agreement was that the parties to the agreement would now be bound by a certain document, and that, that document became the instrument of governance that the Zimbabwean leaders brought home from Lancaster House conference. There is what is called the Lancaster House Constitution of Zimbabwe, which was enacted by the British Parliament as a statutory instrument 1600 of 1979. And the statutory instruments are hashed up laws that are often proposed by a ministry in order to resolve an urgent problem. And this is according to the British nomenclature of legislation, to say if there is a problem within the British Dominion, a minister can hash up a law. That is called a statutory instrument. So a statutory instrument was rushed and tabled in the British Parliament, and that statutory instrument became the Constitution of Zimbabwe, SI 1600 of 79. That is the document which Zimbabwe inherited in 1980. And in terms of that document, which became the so-called Constitution of Zimbabwe, there were provisions that had been included by the British to safeguard the interests of the whites in Rhodesia. Notably, the whites were preserved to have 20 seats in a 100 seats parliament. So the whites would have a separate role from the general role of the blacks, in that the 20 seats would be elected by the whites' role. In other words, the whites would have separate elections and choose 20 members of parliament. This was preserved by that constitution, and 80% of the seats would then be filled by members who had been elected in a election among blacks or the rest of the population that was not defined by the skin color. And so this provision had to be observed for 7 years, beginning 1980, 18 April 1980, the date that was agreed for us to become independent. And so the Lancaster House, colonial constitution of Zimbabwe, inherited from Lancaster House talks and brought into the country, was imposed on this nation, in the sense that the people of Zimbabwe were here at home while the issues of their governance were debated at the Lancaster House conference, represented by leaders who had been chosen by the British to attend that conference. So the British invited leaders of Zimbabwe whom they thought were material, in other words, were involved and could have an agreement which could be accepted by the Zimbabweans without any referendum, without any voting process. So, yes, let's move on to the issues before us. You asked about the referendum. In 1987, therefore, after the agreed period in which no changes would be effected regarding the preserved or the reserved 20 seats or 20% seats for the whites in Zimbabwe. From 1980 to 1987, that would be the period in which no amendments would be made to affect the reserved seats. Right. Meanwhile, since 1980, before the 1987 amendment, constitutional amendment, there had been civil disagreement between the leading armed liberation parties, namely ZANU-PF and PF-ZAPU. Here at home, there were political disagreements that led to the Gukurahundi conflict. From around 1982 for 5 years to 1987, the Gukurahundi conflict was triggered by the disagreement among the Patriotic Front parties, because the ZANU-PF and the ZAPU at the Lancaster House talks were in one block as a Patriotic Front. But when they came here home for the 1980 elections, they disagreed and fought the elections separately. One as ZANU-PF and another as PF-ZAPU. So PF-ZAPU got 20 seats in that election, and the ZANU-PF got 57 seats, and Bishop Abel Muzorewa's UANC got 3 seats. That adds up to 80 seats. And added the reserved white seats of 20, that came to 100 members of parliament. So after that election of the 1980, a government was formed by Robert Gabriel Mugabe as prime minister, and Kenan Banana as a ceremonial or titular president. And in that government, both ZANU-PF and PF-ZAPU got cabinet appointments in that government. Joshua Nkomo became the Minister of Home Affairs, and Mugabe became the Minister of Defense and Prime Minister. And so the first government itself of the Patriotic Front parties, that is the one that disagreed on political grounds because of the objectives of the parties. ZANU-PF wanted socialism, so was PF-ZAPU, which also wanted communism. And ZANU-PF had been helped by the Chinese in terms of supply of the arms of war, and ZAPU had been assisted predominantly by the Soviets. So the disagreement among the patriotic parties, Patriotic Front parties, led to Gukura Hundi, in the sense that the Robert Mugabe then created what is called the 5th Brigade, which was trained by the North Koreans. And that is the 5th Brigade which ran riot in Matabeleland, fighting members of ZAPU political party and ZIPRA armed liberation struggle. So that political disagreement led to murders and the genocide in the southern region, that is in Matabeleland and part of the Midlands. Now, this conflict happened within the 7-year period that the Lancaster House Agreement had to last before it could be changed. So, ZANU-PF and the PF-ZAPU then began to dialogue, to engage, to end the conflict that triggered the Gukura Hundi. And so in 1987, on 22 December 1987, ZANU-PF and the PF-ZAPU agreed to merge the political parties into one political party. In other words, to combine the political parties into one. That is when the new ZANU-PF, which nominally exists today, was formed. That it was formed by the old ZANU-PF and the old PF-ZAPU merged and kept this name ZANU-PF as the name of the new merged political organization. So that is the organization which is there today. Listeners who would be reminded that the current holiday on 22 December is called Unity Day. That is the holiday which was caused by the agreement between ZANU PF and PF ZAPU on 22 December 1987. Now, after that agreement, then that's when the provision of Lancaster House not to tamper with the constitutional arrangement of the 20 reserved white seats had expired in 1987. That's when amendment number 7 of 1987 was hammered out. It was hammered out by abolishing the post of Prime Minister, which was occupied by Robert Mugabe then, and the post of Ceremonial President, which was occupied by Banana then. Those two were abolished and a new position was created. A new position combined the powers or duties of the executive prime minister with those powers and duties of a ceremonial president, Banana, and then the new position of executive president came into existence. This was 1987, following the Unity Accord between these two political parties. And the reason why an executive president who was given the powers as follows: that executive authority vested in the president, and this was really executive authority perhaps of a government. I'll state why I'm saying perhaps of a government. So the executive authority vested in the president, executive president, number who had the following powers now: 1, head of state; 2, head of government; 3, commander-in-chief of the defense forces. So these 3 powers were then the powers of the executive president. And the reason why the executive presidency was created was in order to facilitate the existence of a one-party state system of government in Zimbabwe. The one-party state would be included, would actually be stated in the constitution itself, that there is only one political party that shall exist, called ZANU PF. The new ZANU PF, which was created on 22 December 1987, merging ZAPU and the ZANU PF. So the constitutional amendment number 7 was passed in order to pave way for a legislated one-party state, or a constitutional one-party state, which would be stated in the constitutional document. And this would happen following the 1990 general elections, because at the 1990 general elections, that's when Mugabe's government, which had become executive by appointment because Mugabe was appointed executive president soon after the amendment number 7 was passed. So around the 31st December in 1987, that's when Mugabe was appointed executive president of Zimbabwe. So by 1990, Mugabe had already occupied that position, except that the position was he was appointed, not elected. So the first election, direct election for an executive president was done in 1990. And at the same time, Mugabe, who had merged with Nkomo's party, who had become one, wanted a mandate from Zimbabweans to establish a legislated one-party state by law of the Constitution. Now, I have taken a little bit of time to explain for our viewers and listeners because it is fundamental in the sense that as we will analyze further constitutional developments of the philosophy of a system of government. So, in 1987, before amendment number 7 was passed, where a parliamentary system of government headed by a prime minister who was a single member constituency who would be elected as leader of a party and as a candidate in a parliamentary election. And those who remember or who may have obtained from history, Mugabe was a candidate for Highfield during the time that he won elections as a candidate elected for Highfield constituency. And that Mugabe headed a parliamentary system of government. Because Banana was a ceremonial president and the head of the state and the commander-in-chief of the defense forces, but without executive power. Then the 1987 combined those two positions to and Mugabe became the first occupant of the executive presidency in Zimbabwe. By appointment from 1987 December, then by election with effect from the 1990 general elections. I think I have done the legal aspect of it, and I can then move on to say that at the 1990 elections, Zimbabweans rejected the idea of a legislated or de jure one-party state where a provision would be included to prohibit the existence of political parties other than the chosen one, the ZANU-PF one. So people of Zimbabwe rejected that idea using the platform of the Zimbabwe Unity Movement, which was led by Edgar Tekele, a former Secretary General of ZANU-PF, who had been fired from ZANU-PF for making it known to this nation that ZANU-PF had never as a party agreed on establishing a one-party state in Zimbabwe after the country had become independent. So Edgar Tekele was very vocal and therefore he was fired from ZANU-PF for being vocal, for saying, no, as ZANU-PF, there's never a situation that as a party agreed to establish a one-party state in Zimbabwe. independent Zimbabwe. So then Tekere became the leader of the Zimbabwe Unity Movement, which was established in 1989, just close to 1990. And the people of Zimbabwe at the 1990 elections rejected the idea of the one-party state, legislated. But a de facto one-party state had actually been achieved by the merger of the two political parties that became prominent in the armed liberation struggle, namely ZANU-PF, which had ZANLA, and the PF-ZAPU, which had ZIPRA. So the merger of those two political parties created a de facto, which means by fact, there was no any other political party immaterial to resist, because the Muzorewa and Stole had fled the country and went to America because the ZANU-PF political party became violent and the two leaders fled the country. The emergence of Zimbabwe Unity Movement then is pivotal, because the Zimbabweans used the Zimbabwe Unity Party to reject establishment of a one-party state. Zoom only got 2 seats at that election, and Mugabe, of course, got a rigged result as the elected president, and Edgar Tekere got a significant vote. So the Zimbabweans demonstrated that they didn't want that. So ever since 1990 elections, this would now lead us to the 2000 constitutional referendum. But in between 1980 and 2000, that's when Zimbabweans began to clamor for a homegrown constitution, because the Lancaster House constitution had been amended beyond 1987 by more amendments that gave enormous power to the executive. For example, the amendment number 9, following 1987 amendment number 7, abolished the two houses system of parliament, the Senate and the Assembly. The Senate was abolished, so that we had a unicameral legislature, which only had one house instead of two houses. And that unicameral legislature was made up of 150 seats, moving away from the 100 seats to 150 seats. As a unicameral legislature, just one house. And that was to concentrate power on the executive branch of government. And therefore strengthening the de facto by fact one-party state. It's a de facto in the sense that there's no provision in the constitution which barred the creation of other political parties. But in reality, in terms of structure of governance, the subsidiary laws and the constitution itself, as amended by amendment number 7 of 1987, had created really a one-party state system of government by fact, not by law. And that characteristic remained right up to 2000, when the Zimbabweans had clamored for a democratic, homegrown constitution, the people-driven constitution. Members will remember, or may have gotten from history, that in 1997, an organization called the National Constitutional Assembly representing the civic movement organizations was created and clamored for a for a people-driven constitution, and that led us to the disagreement with the ZANU-PF Robert Mugabe-headed government, claiming that it was the one which had the right to lead a constitutional reformation, because it was already in government thanks to the Lancaster House colonial constitution. So Mugabe government argued that it was the one that could lead the writing of a new constitution so that it could plug it into the governance system, not the National Constitutional Assembly civic movement. But then the National Constitutional Assembly civic movement refused and continued to be people-based, and that disagreement led to what is popularly known as the Chirgao Constitution under the Constitutional Commission of 2000, and the referendum of 2000 was held. Now, let me for now conclude the first part of your question to say, where is the referendum here? From 1980, the changes we saw in 1987, the changes we saw even subsequently were constitutional amendments, but no referendum featured. Now, theoretically or in principle, it is important for us to interrogate what a referendum is in terms of political ideology. Now, a referendum could be viewed as an opinion-seeking exercise by a government. Opinion-seeking exercise by a government. In other words, a government can organize a referendum in order to seek opinions of the citizens on any issue relating to governance. Any issue that a sitting government will have decided to go to the people to hear their views could now trigger a referendum. So let me say, the adoption of the Lancaster House colonial constitution of Zimbabwe in 1980 came without a referendum. Let's move on. All the amendments that were made after 1980 to 2000 came without a referendum. No referendums or a referenda were held. In 2000, Mugabe decided to hold a referendum on the Chirgao constitutional draft. That draft had come from Mugabe's hands. When I say Mugabe, I mean as a head of presidential government. And that draft included what Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF wanted. And Mugabe put that voluntarily to a referendum. And the majority rejected it in 2000. Then we moved on to the bogus elections in between, and in 2007 there was a bloody conflict that saw the bashing of opposition leaders, which attracted now the attention of SADC and the African Union. And that's when, after the 2008 violent elections. Talks began after the intervention of the SADC and the African Union. And the talks that emerged came under what is now, which was called the Global Political Agreement talks. And in those talks, it was ZANU-PF, MDCT, MDCM that were involved in those talks, because it is the three parties which had candidates in those elections in 2008. And as you would know, that Robert Mugabe was defeated by Morgan Tsvangirai in that election. The majority voted Morgan Tsvangirai in and Robert Mugabe out. This is why the results were withheld for 1.5 months. That is 6 weeks. Just to count 3 million votes. Can you imagine? The results were withheld in order for ZANU-PF to hammer out a violent act on Zimbabweans by finally announcing a result which had no winner, so to speak, 50 plus 1 vote. So the rigged result justified the holding of another election between Mugabe and Tsvangirai. And as you would know, Tsvangirai fled to Botswana first, and he came back, and he fled to the Netherlands embassy at Newlands there because of the intense violence that was meted out on Zimbabweans. And a lot of people died. And a lot of people got their hands chopped, alleging that it is the hands that had voted. And therefore, people's hands were cut off. And there was deployment of the military force in this country. It's on record. It's captured. It's not an opinion I'm making. It's facts that are there. So that bloody election triggered the global political agreement mediated by Thabo Mbeki, former president of South Africa. Thabo Mbeki at the backing of SADC and the African Union as regional and continental bodies. And then we saw the global political agreement of 2008 being hammered out. And in 2009, we saw the global political agreement parties, the three of them, agreeing to voluntarily change the constitution then by including 2 names of individuals into a constitution through the 19th Amendment to the colonial constitution of Zimbabwe. So the 19th Amendment included Robert Mugabe's name into a constitution of a country to say the president shall remain. In other words, recognizing his powers he got from a solo contestant in a runoff election which never occurred, and was recognized in the 19th Amendment to say the Mugabe shall continue to be president. There shall be a president which where Mugabe shall continue to be president. Then there shall be a prime minister to be occupied by Morgan Tsvangirai. Then the 3 parties were named in that 19th Amendment Constitution as ZANU-PF, MDCM, MDCT. Ladies and gentlemen, there is never a situation where a name of an individual or individuals and the names of political parties can be put in a national constitution. But here it happened. The 19th constitutional amendment actually stated Robert Gabriel Mugabe by name, Morgan Tsvangirai by name, MDC ZANU-PF by name, MDC-T by name, MDC-M by name. And it remained a so-called constitution. How can you have a constitution that is personalized, privatized, and partisanized? You can now see that it's a misnomer. This nation had been abused with the terminology of saying it's a constitution when it became a privatized document. So the colonial constitution of Zimbabwe, the Lancaster colonial constitution of Zimbabwe, lost its public image through the 19th Amendment, which then produced the so-called government of national unity, which then presided over the creation of COPAC, which then proceeded to consult the people. But all this happened under Mugabe's presidential government, executive government. And the consultation by COPAC was done under the supervision of Robert Gabriel Mugabe's executive presidential government, not parliamentary. And this is why the whole COPAC process was partisan and not done by the people. It was done by parliament, just in the same manner that all the amendments were done by parliament, not by the people. So you can now see that it is a misnomer to call the Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment number 20 Act of 2013 a constitution. A constitution is a creature of the people, not a creature of a president or of a parliament of some other processes or documents that never came from the people. So here again, in 2013, after the COPAC constitutional draft was tabled in Parliament and was approved in Parliament, then the Robert Mugabe inclusive so-called government, Robert Mugabe, Morgan Tsvangirai, and other Mtambara, decided to hold a referendum. Simply a referendum is a legitimizing process, or simply to have the people allegedly saying yes to that constitution. But the three parties urged their members to go and vote yes, 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 yes. They urged their members and supporters to go and say yes, 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 yes. And then the bill was presented to Mugabe, who signed it. And it became now operative as the Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment number 20 Act of 2013.
Right. I just want to, let me bring you back. I think from all your submissions and your deliberations, it is my understanding is the 1987 constitutional amendment seemed to have laid down a precedence as to that reforms of a constitution can actually be done from a top down, not from a bottom up. Can we safely say that?
Yes. A precedent was set, not only in 1987, but a precedent was set by the Lancaster House Agreement, which took place in a faraway place, deliberating on Zimbabwe's governance and dictated by the Lancaster House Constitution. People were never involved. So, yes, domestically here at home, you are correct to say a precedent was set in 1987 when such a fundamental change which created the executive president occurred without the people's involvement. The idea did not come from the people, it came from the leadership which occupied office then. In a similar manner, that this constitutional amendment number 3 of 2026 is pursuing. The only difference now is there is some mention of a referendum, section 328 of the amendment number 20 Act of 2013. It mentions when a referendum can be held to change the constitution. And if a change is on the Bill of Rights, chapter 14, or on land, chapter 16, or on 328, a provision on the amendment of the 2013 constitution. Those are the three changes that require a referendum of approval before a bill is signed into law by a president. This now becomes the only difference from the other referendums that were held. This one is slightly different in the sense that it mentions that there must be a referendum. But if you take a closer look, you will find that a referendum takes place after a fact. In other words, after a new law proposal has been tabled in cabinet and approved and gazetted, and consultations being held and debated, and when the 2/3 has passed it, before it is submitted to the president for assent, that's when a referendum is supposed to be held, asking people of Zimbabwe, do you say yes or no before the president signs it? And Chairman Misha, you will know that all along since 1980, ZANU-PF political party government has been rigging elections. And even I submitted that even if the referendum were to be held today, who will be presiding over it is still the ZANU-PF machinery. They can again play football with it, Boraramadende, and do what they want, the dictatorship that we are seeing, because they can manipulate Chigumba would be having the ZEC and saying yes, yes, no. And so, in my view, I'm not surrender. I'm not saying they should not hold the referendum. They should hold the referendum according to the provisions of the 2013 document. But what I'm saying is, even should they change their idea or and hold the referendum, let us be on guard. They can still hold a bogus referendum using violence, abusing arms of state. And let me here conclude by saying a process of anything precedes the value of the outcome. A wrong process, with or without a referendum, is sure to produce a wrong product. The truth is that the proposed bill number 3 of 2026 is up to a wrong start and a wrong process. Even if a referendum is to be held, it does not correct the mistakes, the flawed nature. The ideas in that bill did not come from the people, were not authored by the people. Therefore, they can never be made right. Because what should be done is to go to the people with a rudimentary suggestion, then the people will author a constitution. In terms of amending what is there. Now, let me close by saying this section, by saying that in terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Amendment number 20 Act of 2013, there is no provision that can protect the people against misrule or abuse by the current government or regime. No provision for protection against bogus referendum. No provision. So the truth is the whole process is flawed in the sense that it is a presidential government driven. It is a presidential parliamentary system driven, not people driven. This must be highlighted and underwritten to say that this is why I argue that the nation is embarked on the search for a people-driven constitution. Let's move on and make sure that the people of Zimbabwe will write their constitution as an instrument of governance, democratic instrument of governance, authored by the people, not by a sitting president, a sitting government, a sitting parliament. No, because these institutions are not the people. Let me end here for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zembe. I just want to push back on you on what Minister Ziyambi said the other day in his interview, where he said what is left is to conclude the consultation process, and then the bill will be put to Parliament for debate 2 times, and then the Parliament. And in that conversation, he was asked to say, but it takes away the fundamental reason why we went to war of 1 man, 1 vote. And he said, we have already had the indirect election of a president since 1980. What is your view to that?
Like the empirical evidence I have submitted, the evidence of the creation of executive president demolishes Ziyambi's statement to say that since 1980, the president was being indirectly elected. There was never an executive president. So already Ziyambi is telling lies. That is not true. We had a parliamentary system of government, not presidential system of government. We couldn't have had an election appointing an executive president who was non-existent. So what he said is not true. Like I said previously, when you asked me that question again, the media should take what the evidence I have given and what I am saying to Ziambi for him to explain why he lied to this nation. The facts are there. It's a matter of historical record. It's not Dr. Zembe fabricating anything. No, I'm simply stating historical facts. Because what the ZANU-PF people do is that they forget historical facts. And they think that they can do tricks by stating wrong statements, which do not even recognize historical fact. And they think that the people have forgotten. And so what they do is they just lie. And because they are monopolists, they are abusing the media institutions of state, where most people may have access to what they say. They do not want open political competition, open competition in terms of the discourse on issues of governance, constitutional governance in particular. I hope that this program will invite Ziambi here, so that we share in the debate, so that Zimbabweans can listen and also pursue us as political activists and leaders and constitutional actors in search of the truth and in search of a long-lasting solution to problems of governance, management and governance of the state of Zimbabwe as a Republican state, which can only be created when Zimbabweans author their own constitution and declare that we have become a republic governed by a constitution authored by the people's process, not some other privatized in partisan processes we have had ever since 1980 to date. So I've dismissed Ziambi's statement, and the Zimbabweans, I'm just an agent of the people. Zimbabweans have dismissed actually Ziambi and his party's position on this matter. They should simply come to say we are dictators, we do what pleases us regardless of the interest of the people.
Is the noise coming from your end? All right, okay.
Yes, there was some interfering noise there. Hello?
There's some noise. I don't know whether it's coming from your end or from the system.
Yeah, it's some call which was interfering. I have terminated it.
That's fine.
Let's continue.
All right. So what we are going to do, we are going to see some young people before we get to the next segment. I want also those who are watching us online to ask your questions. There's no a question that is small or stupid. Any question, when we get responses to questions that we learn, and we discussing here, we research more, we put more depth to what we are discussing, especially when we are responding to questions. So for those who are online, and I also give you an opportunity if you want to come and ask Dr. Zembe physically here in the studio. I'm putting a link in the chat box so that you can actually join here and you ask your questions. Either you can ask it in the chat box, or you can actually come into the studio and ask your question, and Dr. Zembe will be here to respond. While we do that, we will listen to what the other young people are saying about 2030. Yeah, I think Dr. Zembe has just dropped for a while. But let's hear what Mugabe said about when we get to situations that we don't, if we want to chant a new way.
We shall overcome. Power to the people. We are not going to make the same mistake the rest of Black Africa has made. And we are going to learn from their mistakes.
So, in other words, what he is saying is we will not do what the other people have done. We will learn from people's mistakes. So we are at a critical moment in Zimbabwe where we are facing serious challenges when it comes to governance, and apart from having serious challenges with our governance, the same governing people want to change the constitution to consolidate power. And so as we are with Dr. Zembe in the studio today, we will go further and ask him some few questions. But if you have got any questions on the chat box, please put your questions in the chat box. Dr. Zembe is here to respond. And maybe if you want to have a feel of being with him in the studio, I've put the link in the chat box so that you can join us here in the studio. And Dr. Zembe had lost connection a little while. He's back. And while we were out, Dr. Zembe, we played a video of the young people in Zimbabwe demonstrating, saying they are saying no to 2030. I just want you to say a few words to the young people. When I was preparing for this conversation, I was brought to Highfield in 1963 at the house of the late Enos Nkala. They were gathered there, a number of people. If you are looking at their ages, it ranged from 26. Edgar Tekere was the youngest there, and the Enos Nkala was 47, which was the oldest. And they constituted the first leadership of ZANU-PF, and there was no one who was even 50 years. We are all more than 50 years. So, because there's always a sentiment among the young people to say, we need someone to lead us. We need a signal. But here are a few of them, I think they were less than 10. in that house, and they constituted the first leadership of ZANU-PF. What message can you give to the young people, especially taking reference to that historical moment?
Well, the message is that, life here on earth is ordered like that, to say that one generation procreates another in a continuum. That's the life, the nature of our life. Humans as biological organisms, we are born, we grow, we get old, we die. This is one generation. But each generation procreates new human beings. This is why, in terms of our own African knowledge basis, let's go to the home environment. The moment a boy grows into an adult and the boy looks for a female partner to establish a family, when that family is blessed with a child, that child begins the succession process. The parents are the managers, the governors, the leaders who fend for the family. But the children, elderly children, become deputies in all responsibilities in the home environment. There is the succession system. Never is a situation where parents would not allow their growing children to assume responsibilities of governing, of managing and governing the household situation. And by the time the elders, the parents become unable to perform certain duties, they will have taught their young ones to assume the responsibilities. And the young ones assume the responsibility to fend for the family, taking care of the elderly parents. Now, this philosophy of governance and succession should actually be in all institutions, in all governance, in all organizations, be it business organizations, be it governance institutions, be it educational institutions, right across the board. So the young people of Zimbabwe should deliberately make decisions to get to know the ropes of the game, because they are the ones who will be assuming the leadership from the home environment to the neighborhood to the organizations in the country, economic organizations, including governance organizations at national level. They must prepare themselves to play that role. So it's not too much of any choice, but it's like it's a given status that you would have to play that role at some point at some stage in your lifetime. So my strong advice to the young people is that, like ourselves too, we have become elderly, but we began political activism at a tender age, around the same ages you made mention of Innocent Khala and Edgar Zwana Itekere, the ages of 26 and 27. If some of us could have even started when we were still younger than these ages, and we are still in the trenches to fight for the democratization process, because we are still alive, we still have the energy to do what we are doing. And on our part, we will remain doing so for as long as we are endowed with the energy and the health to do it. So the young people must learn from us, because we were once young as well, and must learn from all the people who even participated in the liberation struggle. They left school in high school and joined the liberation struggle. So I expect the young citizens of today to do the same, because they are not going to avoid the responsibilities of leadership, management, governance, economic production for the nation, because they will have the energy to do so. But if they allow themselves to be consumed by the drug menace or by fear to stand for what is good and what is right in order to shape their future, then their future is going to be terrible for them as individuals, for their families, and for their communities in the country. So I will continue to urge young people to be more active, to be proactive, more than being reactive. Because here we are demonstrating, we have been active from way back in high school and to the present states and to our present ages. And like I can conclude by saying, I'm now 68 years old, and Mnangagwa is 14 or 15 years my senior. Chiwenga is 2 years my senior. So I cannot hang the political gloves and boots. No. Andigona kukanda mapfumo pasi. Nokuti handingasarendi. I cannot surrender to my elders who have who need to be actually corrected, that they are doing wrong things, particularly Mnangagwa himself. And this is why you, Vamisha, and myself are involved in the current conversation. So the young people definitely must embrace and must take a frontline position, because they are the vanguard of the current constitutional and electoral struggle in Zimbabwe. Thank you. Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that enlightening response. Because I was really intrigued by that team, because I didn't think it was a team. Tekere brought in the energy and the vibrance from the youth, and you find the Ndabaning Stole bringing in the ideological, and the Chitepo bring the liquor. So it was a comment. So we need each other. We need all of when we are engaging in this. As we are coming to the close of our conversation, Dr. Zembe, we have realized that we, as you rightfully said, from 1980 there's always been constitutional changes which are not people driven. The one that were supposed to be a people driven, which was 2000, was hijacked, and as rightfully said, that the government thought as the governing body, they are the ones that were supposed to author that constitution, and the people of Zimbabwe resoundingly rejected that constitution. And we also have a 2013 constitutional that amendment that we are calling the constitution now, and we have said it is a fraud. So, and of course, we are also saying no to 2030. And amidst this emotions of people saying no to 2030 and having a constitution, which some are saying is our constitution, how do we then bring in the message that we need a people-driven constitution, and how, what mechanism should there be for us to realize that, and how do we force our government to really realize that we need a homegrown constitution?
Yes, let me start from identifying the fact that the guiding principle, which could be said to be quite outstanding when Zimbabweans fought for independence, was the attainment of democracy. Democracy is a system of government which is people-driven. What it means is that you need the wisdom of the people. So you go to the people, you gather their ideas in terms of governmental issues, because they involve all of us as citizens of Zimbabwe. Now, if we then have had the belief of elections to say that democratic governance should be based on a civilian process of holding elections, clearly that philosophy of governance got acceptance even prior to our embarking on the armed liberation struggle. Our nation had long agreed on that system of government, which involves every citizen. There is no reason why we should be at a loss as to how can we have the people of Zimbabwe authoring their own constitution. Yet at the same time, we have been going and saying elections, elections. Even the current Mnangagwa's regime claims that it got legitimacy from a 2023 electoral process. It's an idea of elections, although they rigged, you and me and everybody we know. There should never be any delay of the acceptance of the role of the people in creating a constitution. The requirement now becomes of the citizens of this country who have blueprints, researched the blueprints on a constitution-making process driven by the people. These are the competing ideas we require on board. And I can take this opportunity to inform our dear viewers and listeners that from 2011 to 2016, there was a research conducted by Dr. Uriah Zembe under the educational leadership or auspices of Christ University, Bangalore or Bengaluru, India, Karnataka state, a nation of about 1.4 billion people. That university handled the whole academic research process. And Dr. Uriah Zembe's thesis title is Developing a Democratic Constitutional Framework through a people-driven constitution-making process for Zimbabwe. And the research outcomes laid out how Zimbabweans can author their people-driven constitution. The doctoral thesis did not study the contents of a people-driven constitution because it would have been unresearchable to get to the minds of all Zimbabweans in terms of governance principles of what they wanted. And I put it that the doctoral research study dealt with the process of producing or of writing or of authoring a people-driven process. And therein lies the mechanics or the people-driven constitution-making philosophy is there already for this nation to adopt and begin the process of having that constitution in place. And that constitution will have power to solve permanently all the problems of governance we have had since 1980 to date. And these are the works. The research was conducted in Zimbabwe. So the Zimbabwean people informed that research process. The issue is now to have other citizens who may have conducted a similar research study or other citizens who may want to embark on a similar research study to do it so that their research outcomes can be grouped together with Dr. Zembe's research outcomes and get the best method of writing a people-driven constitution-making process. So there you are, Ramisha. The solution is there by other citizens of this country and those who respect knowledge. And in this particular case, all the leaders in governance, in politics, in the corporate sector, in the social sector, in the home situation, must be bound by the principle of the goodness of ideas. Because ideas will lead us to problem solving, to permanent solutions that we come across during our stay here on earth. This is why in most organizations there is research and development. budgets by organizations, economic organizations, by governments. When we spend money on research, that is a search for problems that may have faced the nation's life. It is for the search of the truth that should lead us to permanent solutions. So, in short, the solution is there in terms of a people-driven constitution-making process, research process, and which was underwritten and certified by the philosophy or ideology of research and the outcomes. So, Zimbabweans should know that some of their own have already embarked on such a problem-solving approach, getting ideas of the people and formatting them in a manner that is workable. Thank you very much, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zembe. It would have been nice that we continued to be discussing these issues, but as you know, time is always not on our side. I think we have been here more than 1.5 hours, and I think the bottom line, as Dr. Zembe has said, we need a homegrown constitution, and he has already alluded to say the resources there. He has been involved in the research on how can Zimbabweans actually, in particular, bring about a homegrown constitution. As we embark on this search for a Zimbabwe we want, he can be one of the resource people. So for young people, he said we needed to start engaging in these leadership positions because we are the leaders of tomorrow. We don't leave until it is too late. It's always good to rub shoulders with the elders. That's why you always find me hanging around people like Dr. Zembe. I don't spend a day without just having a chat with him. He always drops in some words of wisdom. So whilst to close, and for some who want to engage in the discussion on the just ended the constitutional making process and your argument, what do we need to do next? There's a program coming soon on Mbire TV and also on this NDWG Global TV soon in about 10 minutes. So tonight, this discussion reminds us that constitutional reform is not just about law. It is about legitimacy, trust, trusting the people, and actually hearing the voice of the people. And as we know, from 1987 to today, the question has remained constant. Who truly owns the Constitution? Is it the state or the people? I think from our conversation today, it has resoundingly been that the Constitution has been only be written for the people by the state. This is Misha on behalf of Democratic Working Group, Global TV, and Champions Network TV. I will say good night for those in the UK and good night those in Zimbabwe. And wherever you are, it might be good morning. And I will always encourage people to stay informed, stay engaged, and let your voice matter. And I say, good day. Our tagline today, a constitution must not be written for the people. It must be written by the people. And I say good night.